The US fertility rate drops to another historic low. Births in Japan hit record low. Italy's national birth rate is declared a national emergency. Nearly every country is due to shrink by 2100. There's little to no doubt that there's like an ongoing fertility crisis. People are choosing to not have babies anymore. From South Korea to the United States to Norway to Taiwan, pretty much every...
Norway as well. I didn't expect that, to be honest. So everywhere's having a crisis. Yay! We're all in this together!
Rich country. And you might not think this is a problem, but it is a problem for a few reasons. The reality is that people are living longer than ever at the moment. When people start to live this long, you need new workers to replace the ones that are retiring.
China has this problem because of the one-child policy they had for a long time. Yeah.
New workers to pay taxes that will eventually fund the pensions of those who retire. And you need young people in the workforce to take care of those older people. In the 1960s, there were 6 people of working age for every retired person. And by 2035, it's expected to be 2 to 1. This is one of...
2 to 1? Holy dude. Man, I hope this isn't like some overblown, like... Maybe it is overblown. I don't know, man. This is terrifying to think about.
Those topics where if you ask 5 different people, you'll get 5 completely different answers as to what the reason is. People tend to have quite strong opinions. Some people might say it's a cost of living issue. Some people...
It absolutely is. I think people are scared and uncertain because if you're in an unstable life situation, your fear for the future, like say you make like 80 grand, right? But you're in debt, you're less inclined, well, not your debt, you need to pay off something like a mortgage. You don't want to have kids because what if something happens to them and you can't provide for them because you have more compounding problems because of this. And because of the economy, you're just scared of getting fired too or being put redundant. No. 100% cost of living? I don't think it's 100%. I think it's a big factor. Could sell the kids? I don't think you can do that anymore, guys.
Might say that it's to do with declining rates of religion in the world. Some people might blame women's liberation movements, for example. Yeah. Either way, no matter what people say, they're typically pretty certain that either their experience or their belief...
Yeah, in a way, women's liberation led to women having jobs, so they're less inclined to stay home. So technically, yes. It is, technically speaking. It's all the above, yeah. Is
the reason why on a global scale, people aren't having children. I think we can do better than that because when I see that there's a problem that is affecting Norway, the US, Taiwan, and France, I tell myself that there's got to be like a better answer that we can give, right? Because these countries are completely different. The childcare situation, for example, in Norway...
Women had jobs before women's lib, only rich women didn't have jobs. You should go educate yourself in Google or something. I don't know what to tell you. No. No. Go Google. I'm not about to unpack it.
Is vastly different to the childcare situation in the US, which is vastly different to the UK. So I feel like we can get a better answer than just this one-line solution of, oh, it's the cost of living. I think we can do better. If you'd asked me, to be honest, like even just a couple of weeks ago, I would have put the blame squarely on the cost of housing. In fact, there's this one chart that lives like in my head rent-free. It's a chart that...
Yeah, this is strong. House prices have grown far more quickly than incomes. Yeah. Cost of living is insane now. Ugh. It's crazy, man. Look at this. Average net family income among 25 to 34s. It's gone down and then it climbed a little bit in 2016. What if this graph went out to 2020? That would be even crazier. This graph only goes up to 2017, chat.
Compares the growth of house prices to the growth of incomes in the UK. And intuitively, to me, it feels like that's why people wouldn't want to have kids. And to a lot of people, it feels that way. But I want to challenge my intuition and maybe we can reach a more nuanced answer as to why this is more of a global problem than necessarily a specific localized problem. For example, this is a piece of research from the US, which tried to establish what the effect of a $10,000 increase in housing would be on people's decision to have kids. Unsurprisingly, if house prices go up, it corresponds to a 2.4% drop in the decision to have kids.
Wow, not having money to provide for your future children makes you not want to have kids. Yeah, stability. We are not like, how do I put it? We're not like a cat, for example. A cat will go into heat and just have babies because they're having sex, right? Whereas we have at least a choice. Yeah, responsible, or you're thinking about it. If I'm struggling to provide for myself, why would I want kids? Exactly. You don't want to put them through that, or at least most people don't.
You are renting. However, if you own your home, you actually become more likely to have kids as house prices go up. The net effect of this is that when house prices go up in the US, more people actually want to have kids, which is really counterintuitive. But there is some variance because in the UK, the effect of increasing house prices is a net decrease. And this is just one piece of evidence that immediately helps us understand that we can't just think of this problem as a one-line solution. Clearly, housing can't explain the full picture. I think the cost of having children is another huge factor that people typically fall back on when they explain the reasons why people aren't having kids. It's too expensive. However, it seems that even paying people to have kids isn't working very well. Taiwan.
I thought that they started giving but they gave visas for people if they wanted to get married to like a South Korean or a Japanese woman, just for them to like come over and start quote unquote breeding. Is that a fake thing? They do? So that ultimately hasn't helped that much, has it? Yeah, breeding visa. Hold on, let me fact check it really quick. Is breeding visa real in Japan? There's no such thing as a breeding visa in Japan. Oh. Japan skilled worker. I can't really find anything. Never mind. I guess that wasn't real.
Spent more than $3 billion trying to get its citizens to have more children, and it's had no success at all. In France, they've spent even more money, about 4% of their GDP on...
That's insane, actually. 4% of the GDP?
...on various measures to encourage people to have children. To put this into perspective, if the...
But then they raised the retirement age in France. You spend the money, but then you raise retirement age because... And then people are like, oh shit, I have to work until I'm like fucking 89 million years old? Yeah, no thank you. I don't want to have kids.
US spent 4% of its GDP on family measures. That would be the equivalent of the entire defense budget. So countries are actually, some countries at least, are actually spending a huge amount of money on things like tax breaks, things like direct cash transfers, and things like childcare benefits to encourage people to have kids. So clearly there's a bit more to this whole situation than meets the eye initially. And I think we can maybe look at some of the research and evidence, because there is a whole body of research and evidence to engage with. And I've tried to find the best bits to share it with you. And I'm curious to hear what your opinions are on these different aspects. What I do find really interesting is like how the narrative has changed around this topic, because a couple of decades ago, overpopulation was all the rage.
Yeah, I remember that. And that's why the one-child policy became a thing in China as well. They were scared that it was gonna... It's crazy to me that they did not think that the demographic collapse would happen because of this. I guess it's just because nobody else did it before, so they didn't know that this would be like a result of it. It's terrifying to think about.
Discussion around the number of people on Earth revolved around the fact that there were too many people, and we have two people to blame for this. First of all, we have this dude here. His name is Thomas Malthus, and he is an 18th century economist, and he was the first major figure to really write about this idea of a population boom. He saw that the quality of life in 18th century England was dropping pretty quickly, and he said that there was just too many people and that we'd get to a point where there wouldn't be enough food to sustain the growing population. And a couple of decades later, another professor wrote about the same topic, His name was Paul Ehrlich, and he wrote a book called The Population Bomb. And people really believed them. To kind of put into perspective how scared people were of overpopulation.
This is very common. This whole thing is very common. Someone will take one tiny little idea and then write it into a book, and then that book 50 years later gets repopulated into another book. I say repopulated, but rewritten, I guess. And people take it as fact. Yeah.
I want to share a quote by the chairman of the Federal Reserve in the US, who said that overpopulation could be more explosive than the atomic or hydrogen bomb. Even on the other side of the world, in China, these fears of overpopulation promoted China's decision to implement their one-child policy, the whole package of laws and regulations designed to stop Chinese people from having more than one child. If we fast forward to today, those fears were clearly unfounded. I think most of us understand that food insecurity is a distribution problem and not an agriculture problem. And instead, we've ended up in the situation where underpopulation is the problem, whether or not.
And the population demographic collapse is happening too. I don't know, man. Do we believe then that maybe in 40 years we're gonna have a demographic collapse? What if they're wrong? Just like they were wrong about this part.
Not enough young people. And I want to take a little bit of time to talk about the US specifically, because I think they've got some really interesting factors that paint a different picture of the fertility crisis to the one that you might have in your head at the moment. This is a graph of the US fertility rates, and it's the kind of graph that makes you want to.
The US fertility rate has mostly decreased since 1957. Damn! Number of births per woman ages 1544. Okay, World War II happens, World War I happens. After, then so after, 1957. Yeah.
Jump to a specific conclusion or a one-line answer as to what's going on here. But the real interesting part of this graph isn't what it looks like now. It's what it looks like when you kind of break it down by demographics. And thankfully, The Economist has done this for me. If we look at birth rate divided by age, we see some really interesting trends. Somewhat surprisingly, the
40 is the new 20? Wait, this reminds me, man, of a trend on Twitter that was saying 30 is the new 40, or 40 is the new 30. All the women are more desirable. Yeah, people love hags. Hag love boom. Not fertility-wise, it isn't. No, I agree. Yeah. Women start having problems. But that's kind of terrifying to think about, that it's it's shifted so much.
Fertility rate amongst women over 30 has actually been steadily rising since the 1990s. However, you might see something else that's quite interesting. Birth rates amongst 15 to 19-year-old women in the US dropped dramatically. The actual figure is 77%. And they actually explain that more than half of the drop in America's total fertility rate is driven by women under 19 choosing to no longer have kids. Around a third of these births would have been unplanned, and the majority of these births would have been on low incomes as well. In the UK, we actually see a similar trend where women at age 20 are having half as many children. Unlike richer women, these young women are not going to compensate by having more kids in the future. And I actually want to take a brief...
Yeah, I guess it's an education thing, yeah. My parents always warned me, they're like, don't have sex out of wedlock. Don't do it. You will end up poor. And you won't be able to go to college. And I'm like, okay. Don't be a hoe. Yeah, my dad being like, don't be a hoe. Don't do it.
Second to have a little aside and talk about the fact that often the most vilified group of people are actually the most important group of people to society. I'm sure you've heard young single mothers described as a burden on society or as lazy, but clearly
it's not lazy. It's just really, really fucking hard to be a single mom. A good single mom, it's terrifying to be a good single mom because you're caring about your kids. Some people cast their kids to the wayside, some single women, but single women do have it really hard. They do.
These women were actually like the backbone of the economy. It's an aspect that I feel many people don't actually think about. Obviously, it would be unreasonable to say that the reason that no one is having kids is purely because teen pregnancy.
And also, don't get it twisted, being a single dad is really rough too. Raising a child alone and caring for it as much as you can is so hard. On one income. God forbid you don't get like what is it called? The income? What is it called? Not alimony. God, what am I? Child support. Yeah, child support. Yeah.
Pregnancies are down. The economic aspect of it is clearly like important. It's clearly relevant. I don't think it's a coincidence if you look in this graph that the countries that have the lowest fertility rate in Europe, countries like Italy, Spain, and Greece, are also the countries with the highest youth unemployment, the countries where young people live with their parents for the longest, and the economy is in the bin, basically. And if you just ask young adults why they're not having kids, a lot of them will say that it's simply because childcare is too expensive. What I do find interesting...
It is. I used to work a job where there was a lot of females and they had kids, or they started having kids, they started popping out kids, right? And then by the time they're like 3 or 4, they basically said that going and taking them to childcare was the equivalent of them working a job. My best friend's wife used to work at a daycare. She's just like $800 a month for a kid. Yeah, it's like a mortgage payment sometimes. It's insane. But you can't do that because you won't make money. But you're not making money because you're having to pay a daycare. Do I have to explain it with a fucking paint? Do I have to explain it with a paint? If you have to pay a daycare to take care of your kid and it costs you as much as your work, if you pay, like, if it pays like $800 a month or $1,000 a month, you're only getting an excess of $200. Like, doesn't make more sense? Plus, like, gas driving to and from work and then driving to the daycare, that probably adds up too. Just parroting the justifications these folk use. Well, I'm just saying. No. I think some of them get locked in. I don't think a lot of these people understand that they kind of get locked in. Yeah, gas sucks.
Though, is that the fertility crisis is one that affects the whole world, and it affects countries that spend an incredible amount of money on social programs for kids. So this is a quote by Robert Reich. If you don't know who Robert Reich is, he was US Secretary of Labor. He says that Norway spends around $30,000 per child on early childhood care.
Wow.
Finland spends $23,000. Germany spends $18,000. And the US spends $500 per child. Obviously, the US.
But then why do all these countries, even though the childcare is really good or the pay is really good, why does it not matter? Riddle me this, Batman. Why does it still not matter?
Has a huge childcare spending problem. It just doesn't want to invest in young children. But Norway, which is spending incredible amounts on early childhood care.
Yeah, exactly. And it's still petering out like this. It's a multitude of factors.
Is still seeing a below replacement birth rate. And when we talk about this problem, we tend to lump men and women in together as if their experience of having children is identical, when there are actually some pretty significant differences that can at least help us explain some.
Women's earnings drop. Wait, man, Vox? I don't know if I trust Vox, man. I'll take this with a grain of salt. Women's earnings drop significantly after having a child. Men's don't. Hold on. Hold your horses. Dial it back. What's wrong with Vox? I don't want to get into it. Vox is like... They've been known to, like, skew data. But what my point is, like, first childbirth goes down and then it meters out. But when you have a child, you can't go back to work, so you're missing out on the opportunity of working. Yes, of course you're... This seems kind of fucking stupid. Keep in mind this is from Denmark, but it doesn't matter because it's like you're not working, so of course it's gonna go down. You're taking care of a kid 99% of the time up until maybe you can go back to work and then it goes back up again slowly, maybe. I don't know. What is the measurement of like what is defined as going back to work as well? Maybe you go part-time, maybe you go full-time. What if the mother simply stops working? That's an average? Yeah, exactly. It seems kind of skewed. Also, what the fuck are you doing? I keep hearing shit my dog's doing. Sorry. I was just checking on him. I thought he was doing something bad. Bad though. What was I saying? Guy doesn't ask all the right questions. Average woman doesn't shack up with a broke male as a rule. This usually means he needs to make more than her to support all three. The smart move is to have a lower earner stay at home and take care of them. This is the fact that most women choose to stay home. Well, now that women want to make careers, a lot of them don't, so therefore they don't want to have kids. That's a big factor. Because women don't want to sacrifice their career to have a child. That's a big factor. I'm not saying that's for everyone. I think there's a lot of women who are like, okay, I'm going to do both. But that's a big factor as to why this is happening.
More of the trend towards choosing to not have children. And one of these big factors is the fact that women's earnings drop significantly after having a child. And that drop persists decades after they have children. This is...
Well, yeah, some of them only go back to part-time. When my mom had kids, she had my brother and then she had me. She never really went back properly to a full-time job. She was part-time, like teaching a little bit here and there, but she never fully went back to work. My dad was the full-time bread earner, 9 to 5, you know, driving back from work and earning the money. Yeah.
Not so much of a problem for men. Men who choose to have kids don't earn significantly less than men who don't choose to have kids. And they don't also experience a short-term drop in the amount.
Having kids doesn't affect men's salaries. First childbirth. Men without kids, men with kids. But it, dude, this graph is unironically so redundant. This just seems so like biased. Like, look, it's Vox again. But like, hear me out. Because the man still has to keep going to work. It affects their spending, not their salaries. Yeah, you see a little dip. Like, it goes below the graph, obviously. But a salary is a flat thing.
That they earn. Gender-based differences in terms of the experience of childcare, I think are a remarkably important factor because ultimately you need two people to have a child. This tracks with the work of Dr. Matthias Dupke. He's like the guy to talk about family economics. It's his like area of specialty. He talks at length about the differences between low fertility countries and ultra low fertility countries. In the countries that have the lowest levels of fertility, there is a clear trend of women taking on a greater percentage of the burden of childcare. So in the really low fertility countries, the percentage of childcare duties that is taken on by women can be as high as 80%. In countries that have slightly better...
Yes, but they also work just as much. I watched this Life in Japan video about a family that works right. She takes on most of the work, but the dad works like a 9 to 5 or a 9 to 10, which is insane, by the way. In Japan, they have insane working hours. The woman is doing all of the work, feeding, dressing, taking care of the children, and then she's also either working like part-time or like full-time. They both have to work because of the economy. Because if they take them to childcare, they have to make up for the money that they're losing on childcare. Yeah, Japan has a terrible work-life balance. I feel like this is a very skewed perspective, in my opinion. If you want to watch that stuff, by the way, it's a really good channel. I think it's called Life in Japan. And it's like real people, not like hired actors or whatever. It's like actual people that they film, and they talk about their like routine. I forget what the channel exactly is called. It's ran by that guy that has a Japanese wife. Someone will know what I'm talking about. But anyway, I think this is a little bit skewed.
Fertility ratios, this percentage is much closer to 50-50. There's still a huge stigma in some of these countries, particularly South Korea and Japan, where women are still expected to spend huge amounts of time at home taking care of children, but they can't survive without having a career, or they simply just want a career, which is also very reasonable. The decision
and a lot of them do choose a career and they just can't balance it. It sucks. It's tough.
to have kids is, in some extent, a signal of optimism.
Wait, hold on, let me read that one. Is that
very reasonable? The decision to have...
In 1920, we took the children out of the coal lines. In 2020, the most popular video game on the market is Minecraft. The children yearn for the mines. Daddy! Aw, ew! Ew!
Kids is, in some extent, a signal of optimism, right? A signal in the belief that you'll have a good future, your kid will have a good future, and the world on the whole has a good future ahead of it. And I think these disparate factors all play into a single idea of optimism about the world. There's a really good research group called Our World in Data. They're amazing. They compiled some data on how optimistic people feel about the world. And you can see that there's this concentration of rich, low fertility countries at the bottom of this graph. And I think it helps us at least explain somewhat why the countries that are even trialing just direct one-off cash payments are not seeing remarkable improvement. Giving someone a one-off payment does...
They're offering them $10,000?
Direct one-off cash payments and not seeing...
$10,500 offering for new parents. South Korean parents are being showered with cash, but I also say money alone will not fix the country's fertility woes. Here's another perspective. You go into the workforce in South Korea or Japan and you get worked like a dog. Like, you get worked, like, you wake up at 6 a.m. and you come home at 10. That's like a very common thing over there. How are you supposed to have time for, like, dating or getting to know someone or to have babies or even get laid, period? It's horrible. It doesn't matter that you're getting paid $10K. You just don't have time. Period.
Remarkable improvement. Giving someone a one-off payment doesn't necessarily make them feel like the world is going to be a better place in the next 5, 10, 15 years. On the other hand, places like Taiwan have tried extended maternity leave, and that hasn't worked because that has actually increased the risk for women. They're going to be out of the workforce for longer and they're going to struggle to recover the income that they once had. There are these macro factors like the...
That's always been a thing, and unfortunately, it is what it is. Recovering your income, because unfortunately, that's just how it is having a career. Like, if a guy stops working as well, that will happen to them too, except, like, women have to do that for a couple of months or even longer. Especially if you're a single mom. Like, God, it's tough. You earn the money, you then need childcare and don't get to really raise your kid with the work time requirements. Yeah, no, I think it's a multitude of factors. I don't think it's about spending. I don't think it's just about spending. I don't think it's just because of, like, living conditions. It's a multitude. But I think the biggest factor is economy, honestly.
Gender wage gap, which kind of creating like a negative pressure, and it's not enough to balance that negative pressure. But importantly, it's also worth mentioning that a lot of the drop in fertility is actually a good thing. It represents that people have agency. People can actually choose whether or not to have children, especially women. In fact, we use the term fertility crisis when it's not really a fertility crisis, it's a worker crisis. Governments aren't trying to create self-actualized, happy, positive individuals. They're trying to create meat for the grinder.
Yeah, corpos. Yeah. No, I think they brought in some good data. I think they got some questionable data, but yeah. Good video. I like that. Corpo Borpa. Yay! They want meat for the grinder. Yeah. Sure wish my parents didn't have kids. No, that's wrong, Chatter. If your parents didn't want to have kids and you wish for that, then you wouldn't be here, and that would be sad. Truanhead would not be happy with this video. That's okay. We're allowed to disagree. I disagree with some of this guy's points. It doesn't mean he's, like, completely incorrect. I need to breed. What the fuck? Chat! Do you think before you type? Holy shit! What the sigma?